Thank you for joining me today. I'm grateful for the time. Now, I'm going to be talking about delivering your data center migration successfully. And if we go to the next slide, well, I want to introduce myself first of all. So, my name is Sarah Lean, and I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. I've been in the IT industry for over 14 years now, and I am firmly in that IT pro or infrastructure type camp. That's where I attack IT problems from. I'm also a massive ambassador for the STEM programs that we have. So, that's encouraging the next generation to enter into a science, a technology, an engineering, or a mathematics career. So I'd love to talk to people about coming into IT, especially our next generation of females. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can see that when we talk about data center migrations, there are various different triggers that people have for those data center migrations. So, some people are moving because maybe their data center contract, their lease contract is due for renewal, and they have to think about something else to host their workloads. Some people are thinking about their hardware or their software is becoming out of support. So, it's end of that time. It's 3 years, it's 5 years down the line since they've bought it, and they need to think about a new solution. Now, obviously, in 2020, we've had a big driver away from on-prem data centers because everybody is working remotely. However, regardless of what your trigger is, regardless of what industry you are, regardless of what size of company you are, I always talk about 4 different stages along that migration journey. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that the steps within that migration path are discovery, assessment, migrate, and secure and manage. Now, you shouldn't just think about these data center migration projects as a technology project, because that's the wrong way to approach them, in my view. It's also about people, the people that use the IT equipment and the people that run your IT department have to be included in these migration projects as well. So you really have to think of these projects in 3 kind of silos: as a technology, the people that use the IT solutions, and also the people that work in the IT department. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can start to talk about discovery. And your discovery phase is really important for from one of the customers that I've spoke to. Discovery is a key piece for them. Discovery should be all about understanding what's in your environment. So I know we all should have documentation, and we should all be confident about what's happening within our environment and know where all our servers are and know how everything interlinks. But let's face it, there's probably something that's been snuck in there, that's been put in temporarily, that we've forgotten to update documentation about, we've forgotten about, or has been completely missed because someone's done something under the radar. So your discovery phase is really all about finding out what's in your data center and understanding those connections, understanding how all your servers, how all your workloads interconnect. Now, as I said, it's not all about the technology phase. And when you're discovering what's in your data center, you should also be talking to people within your IT department about, probably potentially any issues that they've seen, any patterns they've seen to some of the workloads, and it might give you an idea that, it's time to refresh something or think about something completely different. And also speak to the stakeholders within the other departments. So speak to the HR person, speak to someone in, the manufacturing department, find out what they think of IT solutions, if there's anything that can be improved on, because this is also a great time to be doing that as well. Interviewing these people as well will also find out key critical information about things like when they need that software. We all know that at the end of the month, the payroll software is mission critical, and we shouldn't be moving it, bringing it down, having outages on that. But what about all the other software and other workloads that are within your department? What's key and critical to the business's success as well? So think about those kind of things when you're doing discovery. When you're thinking again within your IT department, have a look at what your staff level is like. So if you're looking to move to Azure, do your staff know all about Microsoft Azure? Have they been learning about it? Have they been attending training courses, or do you need to stop and invest in some of that as well? Because what you don't want to do is move from a situation where everybody's comfortable looking at the solutions that they have and looking after all the solutions, and then they suddenly move the workloads up into the cloud, and all of a sudden they don't know how to use that cloud, and things go massively wrong. So there's a lot to think about within discovery. Now, if we go to the next slide, one of the things you should be thinking about within the discovery phase is what tooling you should be using when you are doing that discovery. Because the last thing any of us want to do is have to log on to every server, take a mental note or take a physical note of what services are running, looking at the TCP ports, writing down IP addresses, looking through patches to find out what patch level things are at. That's the last thing any of us want to do. So there are tools out there that can help you do that discovery and automate some of that discovery for you. Now, Microsoft have some native tools that allow you to discover your environment. So Azure Migrate is a great tool that can help you do the discovery, the assessment, and the migration of your workloads, but there are third-party tools out there as well. You might even have some tools within your own environment currently that can help you do this discovery or the assessment or the migration. So definitely have a look at what's happening with the tooling, do some research, trial them, try which ones are free, have a look at how they work, find out what you like about those tools, find out what you don't like about those tools, and then potentially look at the right tool as well. Now, on the next slide, we'll see we're talking about cost, and that's a massive thing when you are doing these migration projects. Everybody is trying to save some money potentially, and often when you look at the cloud computing cost, it can get quite scary because sometimes it looks a lot more expensive than what your on-prem environment looks like. However, what happens, unfortunately, is people don't look at the full cost of their on-prem environment. Very often, your data center is in the basement or in a room somewhere within the same office block as the rest of your staff. So a lot of those costs that are running your data center are absorbed by the company and by the organization, and the IT department don't see them. So things like electricity, the security of the building, do you have CCTV? The air conditioning is all getting consumed within the big kind of budget and the load of what's happening within that office as well. So you have to try and break down those costs. You have to try and compare them as well as the IT costs to what you're looking to move into the cloud. Otherwise, you're not comparing apples to apples, and that's why it can look quite different. Now, at Microsoft, we have some tools that can help you along that journey. So our total cost of ownership calculator is a great place to start, where you can start to input some of your information around your data center. And then we give you some inputs or outputs, of what that cost actually looks like if you don't know what your own data center looks like. So definitely have a look at this and definitely focus in on it, but it shouldn't be the driver for your migration, if I'm totally honest, because 9 times out of 10, it probably will come out a bit wrong or look a bit more expensive for you. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can start to talk about the assessment phase. Now, the assessment phase is once you've gathered all of that data, you're starting to look at what's going to happen if you migrate your workloads up into the clouds and up into Azure. So what workloads can be moved, what's appropriate to be moved into the cloud, and what's not appropriate to be moved into the cloud. Because let's face it, not all workloads make sense to be moved to the cloud. And potentially there are maybe things that you don't want to move to the cloud because you've just invested in them. You maybe have just bought a brand new server, brand new physical server, invested in the latest operating system. So you've got Server 2019 running on that, and the server is supported in terms of warranty and guarantees and parts for the next 5 years. Maybe that isn't appropriate to move that workload into the cloud. Maybe it's appropriate to continue to use it on-prem and to use it for the next 3 or 4 years and get the value out of that asset. However, regardless of what your choice is, it should be down to what you need and what your company needs. It shouldn't be driven by the latest trend or potentially what someone is doing with their company. It should all be about what you need and what your company needs. There's no right and there's no wrong answer for how you move your workloads or how you don't move your workloads up into the cloud. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can start to see some of the other things that we should be thinking about at the assessment phase. And that's things about how we're going to actually govern and how we're going to run our workloads in the cloud. Now, the Cloud Adoption Framework at Microsoft can really help you start to think about things like cost management, policies, governance, security. These are all things that you have to think about and have to design the policies around. Often, running your workloads in the cloud can be very similar to what you do on-prem, but there are also new things. There are also changes that you need to adopt and be aware of. The big one is probably the security. Like I said, you might have a security guard and CCTV built into your data center at the moment. That's something that you don't need to take care of when you move to Microsoft Azure. Microsoft take care of that. They design these data centers and take care of the physical security of it. Whereas your job as a customer is to make sure that your data is secure. That's where you should stop. You should be taking care of making sure that no unauthorized access is happening to the data in terms of a technology. No one has a silly password that just is password one attached to some storage or their account. Those are the things that you need to take care of. So looking at the Cloud Adoption Framework is a great way to start to think about how you're going to operate in the cloud as well. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can start to think about resource management and what we're actually going to be doing. Some of the other things you need to think about, like naming conventions, how you're going to operate, who's going to have access to your resources, who's going to have full admin rights, if you're going to give anybody full admin rights to things like that. Understand the roles and responsibilities when you move to the cloud, who's doing what and who needs access to what in order to do their job. And again, this is maybe an ideal time to start to redesign some people's roles within the environment, maybe claw back some control if everybody's had full admin rights to everything on your on-prem environment and you don't want to do that within the cloud. You can start to maybe draw that back and really define what everybody's roles and permissions are going to be. Now, if we move to the next slide, we can see the third stage in this process. And the third stage is about actually doing the migration. This is where all your decisions have been made and you're actually starting to implement them. You're actually starting to move your workloads out of your on-prem data center and move them into the cloud. And this stage is going to be a bit scary. It's going to be a bit daunting. It might even involve lots of out-of-hours work for you because you're trying to mitigate and to keep the outages of your applications to a minimum. Now, again, this stage is something that is going to be iterative. It's going to be something you're going to constantly have to repeat. What you should be thinking about when you're when you come to the migration stage, though, is don't start with the most mission critical workload within your environment unless you really, really need to. Hopefully, when you've done that discovery, you have labeled things and said, this is mission critical to the business. We need this running 24/7, and we really need to be secure and safe with this application. And then you've identified some of the applications and workloads in your environment that are maybe not mission critical, that aren't going to be massively missed if there's an outage. So you should really start with those applications and those workloads to do the migration. So if you start with something that isn't mission critical, you can start to learn the process, you can start to test your processes and really understand that process and refine it before you hit that mission critical workload, so that hopefully when you do hit those big workloads, there are no issues and there's no gotchas and no one will be screaming down the phone at you at 2 a.m. in the morning and not understanding what's happening. Now, if we go to the next stage, on the next slide, we can see again that we are talking about tooling. And again, migrating your workloads up into the cloud isn't something that we want you to have to do manually. There are lots of tools around that can help you do that. Now, again, Microsoft has Azure Migrate that can help you migrate your workloads up into the cloud. However, as I said before, there could potentially be some tooling already in your work place that can help you with the migration. And some of the tools that I'm thinking about are maybe things like your backup products like Commvault or Veeam or any of the other third-party ones that are out there. Some of them actually have the capabilities to be backing up or protecting your resources up into Azure and can be turned into a migration tool as well. So you can leverage that existing investment that you've made in that tool to help you do that migration. But again, there are dedicated tools out there, so please do have a look at them. Please do investigate them. Please understand how they work, their costings, and how they'll help you and assist you within your environment as well. Now, if we go to the next slide, we reiterate the fact that at migration stage, this is going to be an iterative process. It's going to be one that you'll complete each time you pick a workload, and you'll learn from each workload that you use. Now, if you aren't comfortable doing this, we do have support from some Microsoft partners that can actually help you do this migration. They can take all of the stress and strain at this migration stage. And some of the partners that we have also have done this multiple times for other customers. So they can take all the learnings, all of the issues that they've seen, and bring them onto your project and try and avoid them as well. But your migration stage is definitely something that's going to continually keep you on your toes and continually keep you learning. And hopefully by, like I said, the time you get to those mission critical workloads, you have the process refined, you understand it, and you can mitigate any issues with those massive workloads and really important workloads. Now, if we go to the next slide, we're talking about the last stage of this process, and that's secure and manage. There's an argument to say that the secure and manage process or stage should be done throughout the project. And yes, you should be thinking about this throughout the project as well, but it's something that's going to become a business as usual activity for you. You're going to start to think about how you operate properly in the cloud and now that all your workloads are there. You could potentially be in a situation where you have on-prem workloads and you also have some workloads in the cloud, so you're running a hybrid environment. You might be at a stage where you're running fully in the cloud and you have nothing on your on-prem data center. Regardless of what situation you're in and what operating model you're in, you have to start to adjust some of the things that you do. So if there's an outage from one of your cloud-based services, how does your help desk report that? Who do they phone? How do they log a fault? How do they communicate that within the rest of the business? And what do you need to do in order to mitigate that outage? There might be nothing that you have to do. You just have to wait for the provider to bring the outage back up. Or there might be something that you have to invoke. You might have to invoke DR. You might have to start doing something. So make sure all of these processes are understood, how you're going to deal with them. Make sure they're documented. Make sure your documentation is updated once you migrate to the cloud and you've moved your workloads. What you don't want to be in a stage is you have really old documentation. There's maybe an outage and someone doesn't know what to do. And instead of, logging a fault with your cloud provider, they run into the data center and press that on button on the old server for that workload, and suddenly the old server comes into life and you've now got really out of date data running from this server, and then you're in another world of pain where you've got a cloud service and you've also got your on-prem service running and you need to fix that. So make sure your documentation, make sure your procedures are all up to date. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can see that we're talking about cost management. And that's something that you do have to think about now that you're running in the cloud. Everything is budgeted slightly different. We are used to in IT departments maybe spending budget maybe once every 3 years or 5 years, that massive investment in new hardware and software and implementations, and not thinking about budget beyond that. Now, when you're running in the cloud, you are charged per minute, per day, per hour, depending on what the service is, and you need to try and take control of that. It shouldn't just be an IT function to manage cost, but it will be you that will have to drive some of that and maybe even look at some of the tooling to helping implement budgets, implementing alerts, teaching the others within your organization how to look at cost management, how to think about cost management within the cloud as well. Now, as important as cost management is, don't think it's something you should be looking at on a daily basis or maybe even a weekly basis. You should definitely be scheduling in time, whether it be at the end of every month or the end of every quarter, to have a look at your cost and your spend within the cloud and adjust accordingly. Look at things like Azure Advisor and see if you can right-size some of your workloads to save some money. You may even have to right-size some workloads up the way to improve performance if there's a bottleneck. But there's various different things that you have to think about. And cost management is important, but it shouldn't be the thing that you get stuck on, and it drives innovation and it drives how you run your cloud environments. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can see this lovely diagram that's talking about how migrations aren't linear and they aren't always simple. You will probably get snagged at some point along your journey and have to iterate and have to maybe stop. You might have to pivot how you're moving and change direction completely if suddenly there's a workload that you didn't discover that's been thrown into the mix, or a new technology has been released that can suddenly change the direction that you want to go in the cloud. It could be budget completely gets changed, whatever it may be. Something along your path is probably going to throw you off a little. Be rest assured that you're not alone in those kind of journeys, regardless of how much prep you do for a migration. I've always seen something trip up a customer. Like I say, it could be a simple thing like the project remit has changed from above, or even that the budget has been slashed halfway through the project and you have to deal with that. But again, these projects are never linear, but they are always fun to do, to be honest. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can see some of the key learnings and come of the summary that I want to highlight. Now, define what your success for these kind of projects look like. They will help you when your project does change path or something changes along the way. It will help you define what's happening and the way to continue forward again. So if your project is driven by a data center contract lease expiring, that is your success and that's driving success. Say your contract is out in July 2021. That is the success measure. If you're out before that contract expires and you don't incur any extra charges, that could be the measure for success, and that's the goal that everybody is aiming towards. Now, you should also start to be thinking about invoking and including the business within your organisation. Like I said at the very top of this presentation, it's not just all about technology, it's also about the people within the organisation. So make sure you're speaking to them, make sure there's no gotchas coming your way because they've suddenly went off and seen a bit of software that they want to use and then throw it over the fence towards IT to implement at some point. Make sure that open communication is happening between your business and you can communicate what's happening if there's any issues as well, and they can understand what's happening. Now, try and script and automate where possible. These migration projects are big projects, and along the way you'll be learning different things, you'll be learning different tips and tricks. Try to take the human element out of that where possible. You'll script things so that they can just be a one click and it'll do the migration for you. It'll carry out some of the steps that you need to be carried out. It will help you speed up the process. And also, like I said, take out that human element where you're working at 2 a.m. and you pick the wrong button and suddenly everything goes kaboom and goes wrong. If you script and automate some of that, you can take out some of those errors and potential risks again within the migration. Please do pick the right tools for the job. I've unfortunately seen some customers pick the free migration or the free discovery tooling, and it's not been right for their environment and what they actually need for their migration. So again, the tools are great for being free, but they might not actually offer you the capabilities that you need. Equally, I've also seen customers pay over the odds for discovery tooling, and it doesn't actually discover the information that they want because they haven't fully looked at it. They've just believed the sales brief. So again, make sure you're trying the tools and make sure it's right for you and it's not just driven by the wrong choice as well. And please do, like I said, cost management is something that trips up a lot of customers. It shouldn't be your sole focus within these migration projects, but it's something that you need to think about when you're moving to the cloud as well. Now, if we move to the next slide, we can see again the cloud adoption framework, and I fully invite everybody to have a read of the cloud adoption framework. There's a lot of information within the cloud adoption framework, but it also has some great resources where you can get some tools to assess where you and your organisation are along your journey and then point you at the right documentation and the right place to have a look at within the cloud adoption framework. There's also deployment templates for building your landing zones, for building out some resource groups, for thinking about how you connect your on-prem environment to the cloud as well. There's lots of different resources within the cloud adoption framework. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can see we're talking about the Azure Architecture Center. And again, this is another great resource that can help you design your environments. There's some great examples about how you can maybe build an application on the cloud where it has a back end of a SQL database and a front end of a web app, and some of the other things that can help support that implementation. So again, the Azure Architecture Center is a great place to jump across and have a look at and bookmark, just to have as a reference in future for you. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can see that we've also got a dedicated migration centre that can help you along your way as well. And this centre has a lot of what I've talked about today. It has a lot of information about the tools, both native to Microsoft and the third-party tools that are available, and also talks, like I said, about the partners that we have that are dedicated to doing these migration journeys for our customers. And if we go to the last slide and final slide, we can see that we've got some resources. There's a link on screen that will take you to more of the resources that I've talked about. There's also my contact details there as well. Thank you so much for taking the time today to listen to me, and hopefully it's been useful. If you've got any questions, please do let me know, or you can reach out individually using the contact details on screen. But thank you.